Hey guys, and welcome to another Schematics update. This time we want to talk about Spinnortality, and this time I've got it on the first try correctly. Therefore, we have James on board. Hey James.
Hi there, good to be here.
You're the dev of Spinnortality. Could you introduce yourself real quick?
Sure, so I'm James Patton, and I would like to make video games full-time. My background is in literature and in sort of studying culture, but I've decided to go and do stuff that's a bit more creative and a bit more up-to-date.
So what are some other projects you've done in the past?
Well, the main two are, there was a tribal management game where you ran a prehistoric tribe called The Gods Are Hungry, and I also made a Renaissance anti-dating simulator murder revenge sim called Masks and Murder, where you play a Renaissance noblewoman whose family are all killed by a bunch of horrible men, and then you have to become proficient in the men's hobbies like dancing or poetry or hunting, and then you have to become good enough that the men let their guard down, and then you kill them in brutal and ironic ways.
That sounds about like all my dates. No, seriously, let's talk about a little bit about Spinnortality. So, what is Spinnortality?
Spinnortality is a cyberpunk like strategy / management game. As the head of your corporation, you start by just selling products, but then you have to market them because they're really horrible products, and so you have to choose the best marketing angles to convince people that these are actually fantastic products and they can't live without them. But then some of the products are illegal, so then you have to bribe politicians to change laws. Sometimes it's easier to get a marketing campaign through if you can also manipulate culture. So that's where buying up media outlets comes in, because then you buy up the media outlets and you can slowly push culture in whatever direction you want. You can also launch black ops espionage operations to, for example, start riots in a country and then push it to the brink of chaos. And then you can set up your own puppet regime. So it's about you as the head of this company kind of gaining more and more power over time and turning the world into your plaything.
So Spinnortality is obviously very based in its theme, you know. We have these corporations and this massive company that you're running. What is your end goal?
Well, there are basically two end goals. The first is you're a person who runs this company. That means that as time passes, you get older, and eventually you'll die. So goal number one is to research enough technology to do with the human body that you understand how brains work, and then you can transfer your consciousness into a new kind of clone body. So that's goal number one. And then goal number two is there are 4 different victory conditions. Basically, depending on which kind of medium-term goals you go for, there are these different medium-term goals that give you these kind of significant boosts. Like they make it easier to change culture, or they make destroying governments easier. Depending on which of those you go for, you can wind up with one of 4 victory conditions, which are like a dictatorship ending, where the whole world is a giant dictatorship kind of ruled with an iron fist. There's a consumerist ending where everyone thinks that they're free and they think that they're making free choices, but actually they're only making those choices because you kind of put them in their head in the first place. So they're kind of like consumerist puppet people. There's also what I call the New World Victory, which is a kind of ultra-capitalistic, really, really hardcore cyberpunk ending where there are no sort of regular democratic governments anymore. There are only corporations. And then the last one, my girlfriend asked that I put this in, but I'm glad she did. It's the kind of nice ending where you don't fix the world. It's not perfect, but you leave the world a little bit better than you started.
So Spinnortality paints a very dark picture of the world and plays a lot with the fears people have right now. regarding big supercorps that basically control everything. So what exactly was the inspiration, I kind of wonder?
Yeah, so the direct inspiration was I'm actually an English teacher by day. That's how I pay the bills. And I had a lesson about thinking about the future. And I came up with a speaking exercise where my students had to come up with these horrible products and then convince me that they're actually fantastic. Which is where the death prediction, it's where the whole market products and then research products and then market them idea came from. But it's also specifically where the death prediction product came from. They argued, well, if you know the exact date of your death, then that means you can plan your finances better. Who wouldn't want that? And I was kind of persuaded by that. But in terms of like real world inspirations, I've kind of been thinking about and learning about like economies and the influence that super PACs and lobbyists have on especially the American government. So basically all of this stuff about the way that the media is being manipulated by very, very wealthy sort of groups, the way that culture is being manipulated, the way that government is being sort of altered by the existence of money, and the way that corporations are kind of sitting right at the center of a lot of these problems. That's all part of the inspiration. Oh, and when I was halfway through developing it, Trump got elected as well, so then I had to put fake news in, of course.
What kind of games, like gameplay-wise, would you compare Spinnortality to?
I think in terms of feel, people have compared it to Syndicate, and it feels a lot like that, but the gameplay is very, very different. I was actually kind of inspired by games like Europa Universalis and Crusader Kings, because I play a lot of Paradox games, so the interface is actually very inspired by those. You can see that just from like the button layouts and stuff. But it's not, it doesn't play very similarly because, well, first of all, they are sort of pseudo real-time. This game is turn-based.
So let's get a little bit more in depth. What kind of strategy is at your disposal?
Well, first of all, you need to decide which products to research. And so that can be every different product. There are different branches of products in the tech tree. So there's like social media, there's sort of body modification, there's task efficiency and business efficiency. And each one of those different branches gives you, it's kind of themed slightly differently. So you might decide to always research the product efficiency ones first because they make your workers more efficient. Or you might choose to research all of the media stuff first because it allows you to manipulate media and therefore manipulate people's culture down the line. You also need to, like, the most obvious one is every turn you basically need to go through the globe and check, okay, where should I be launching products, and then which spin angles, which like marketing angles work best with this culture or this culture. So every marketing angle is focused on a different sort of cultural value. So it might be focused on xenophobia or novelty or collectivism, all these different things that different nations will want. And then at a kind of higher level, you need to be thinking about, okay, which governments am I trying to bribe so that they will like me, so that I can deregulate industries faster? And then are there any nations that I should be slowly trying to destroy so that I can take long-term control of them, so that then down the line I won't have to worry about deregulation. I can just sort of do it with the press of a button instead. So there's several different sort of layers of things that you need to be thinking about. It's basically, it's not that you go for one strategy and then you focus on that 100%, but it's like you keep half a dozen plates spinning at the same time, but you need to think about which plate you're going to add to your repertoire. Oh, and while all this is going on, you also need to be keeping an eye on your public opinion rating, because if it gets too low, then people will start to hate your company, and that will lead to bad random events being triggered.
So, Let's look at like elections and governments and how they work for a second. So how does changing the government that's in power affect the player?
Sure. So first of all, there are three different kinds of government. There is a one-party state, like a dictatorship, that has two parties: the party and the rebels. Every party is popular based on a random factor that changes every few turns because people are unpredictable, as well as which cultural values the parties adhere to. So if the main party likes novelty, and the nation itself also loves novelty, that will count in that party's favor. And there's also a ticking clock, which is that the longer any party is in power, the less people like it. So that means that over time, dictatorships will slowly start to lose popularity just because people get kind of sick of them. So after like 20 or 30 years, they might just crumble anyway. And if the rebel party gets more popular than if it has more than 60% of the popular kind of confidence, then the nation starts to lose stability and will eventually just kind of collapse. Then the next type is a democracy. That is two parties which are democratically elected every 4 years or so. The same rules apply, basically, except that they generally swing back and forth in terms of which one is in power at any given time because of this getting tired over time mechanic. And the third one is a corporation. That's a new kind of state which is run like there are no citizens, only shareholders. It's run more like a publicly owned company, but it's also like the public as well. So if you bribe a politician, that gains you favor, and then you can spend favor to change laws. So you might just want to lower the tax rate because then you'll take home more money, or you might want to deregulate an industry so that then you can launch a product that was previously illegal. But the thing that makes it more interesting is that every time you gain favor with a party, you also gain influence, and that means that the party, like, you control more and more of the party. So if you have like 5% influence, that means, well, you have the party just sort of automatically respects you a tiny bit. If you have 90% influence, that means that the party is pretty much just, an extra branch of your company. So that means that if you've been working on this one party for ages, if you've been just giving them more and more money in order to deregulate industries, you'll have a lot of influence over them, which represents a significant sunk cost. And that means that when they come up for re-election, if they're going to lose, then that will be bad for you, because then you need to choose, okay, either I need to start working on the other party, which is less efficient, or I need to just wait 4 years and hope that my party gets in again, but that takes a long time. Or you could rig the election, or you could assassinate the leader of the party that you want to destroy, or you could spread fake news to delegitimize them, and then your party would probably win the election, and it could be swung that way.
The main goal in Spinnortality, if I understood that correctly, is basically to become immortal, right? So I wonder about the failure states, besides dying, obviously. How else can you lose?
Well, first of all, you can run out of money. The way that it works is that you can borrow money because, you're a company. But if there's a borrowing limit, and if the amount that you owe is ever twice the borrowing limit, then you just lose the game, because it's like, not only have you borrowed yourself into a hole, the hole has got so big that you can never get out at this point. The other way you can lose is you can just get assassinated by very angry consumers. It doesn't come completely out of the blue, but that is one way to die. And right now there is one other way to die, well, to kind of fail, which is there's a character who points out that maybe running an evil megacorporation just is bad, and maybe you should stop. And I think most players would just say, screw you. But if you want to, you can just end the game there. You can just resign, and that's it. And that is a game over, but it's kind of a game over on your terms. So.
Now I'm curious, like, we have all the different nations that you're controlling and manipulating, right? So what makes every nation unique and, like, in their cultures specifically? And are they the same every time?
Well, the nations are randomized. Well, they're not totally random. The way that it works is that every nation has an even spread of the different cultures, but the cultures themselves are randomized. So, and I think that also the randomness kind of helps with replayability, because if it were predetermined, then every new game you would be doing pretty much the same thing, and that would be a bit boring. And they also have, of course, randomized government types. So I think that you start off with 5 nations that are democracies, 3 that are one-party states, and 1 corporate nation at the start of the game. But right now they're not actually, like, Europe doesn't feel particularly European. That is one thing that I would like to change. I can't make any promises, but I do have a writer who's willing to work with me, who knows a lot about geopolitics, and so he might be able to come up with some ways to give me some random events for every nation that just give it a bit of flavor and kind of differentiate them a little bit.
What makes this type of game so compelling to you personally?
Well, yeah, I think the reason that I'm making it is because it gives me an outlet for sort of complaining about all of the ways that the world is a bit messed up right now. I like the fact that it's a game that is fun to play, and it is interesting and engaging and all of that stuff. But it also kind of says something about the world we live in. There was an article by a games writer called Ian Bogost. I think it was called Why Video Games Shouldn't Have Characters. And he basically wrote that if video games just emulate things like film and books, and then they tell linear stories with the characters, then we're kind of throwing away half of what we can do with the medium. That actually they're most powerful when you interact with the system directly, and then you can see how that system functions like the whole way through. So you're not just limited to one perspective. And I feel that that's kind of a problem with, well, not really a problem, but it's a bit of a limitation of some cyberpunk media. You only ever follow, 1 or 2 characters, or 1 or 2 plot lines. You never get to see the whole thing, and how all the different systems interact with each other. So I like the fact that this game, it's not just cyberpunk, but it allows you to understand how all of these cyberpunk systems, which are, huge, how they all interact with each other and influence each other in these really complicated and strange ways.
And if I just look at the last question that we have, which isn't really a question, I just want to know, like, what is the future of Spinnortality, and tell us a little bit more about the game, when you plan to release and stuff like that.
Sure. So my very tentative release date is August next year. I think it will take me about that long. That's sort of that's enough ahead in the future that I have a good long time to work on it, but it's before all the money runs out, so I can go over a little bit if need be. And then it's currently on Kickstarter. Anyone can play the latest build online for free, because I wouldn't want people to play sight unseen. So if you go to the link, then just scroll down to where it says download demo, and you can just play the build for free, and it might be a fun time. Yeah.
Cool. And do you have any social media or anything you want to tell people to follow you to keep close track of what's going on with Spinnortality?
Oh, yeah, sure. So the best place to go is to spinnortality.com, because I will post newsletter updates there. You can sign up very easily, and I promise not to spam you. My Twitter is James_D_Patton. And of course, I'll be posting there as well, but it's easier to miss Twitter than it is an email, I think. I'm also on Facebook under Jamie Patton, but I'm using that more for my own personal use. And my blog is james-patton.net. So if you're more interested in my work, as a creator generally, then you might want to go there. And you can also find those other games that I talked about there as well.
first of all, thanks, James, for joining and telling us about the game. And for our viewers and listeners, thanks for viewing and listening. And if you have any questions, comments, suggestions whatsoever, we have a wonderful comment section. Use it. And thanks again for listening and viewing. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.